Steve with Rotter Tube Reef, and of course Scott Anderson with Mile High Reefers. Check out his channel. Read the video description below for more information on the video, and as always, comment, subscribe, and share it out. Check out both of our channels on YouTube, as well as subscribe to this one. We do our best to teach you what we know, and we also love when the community jumps in and comments so we can all help each other out. So today we're going to talk about saltwater aquarium stability and what's involved with that. And I really think the perfect person for this is Scott, because he's got an awesome, huge 210-gallon tank, a lot of rock, and many different types of coral. So go ahead.
So stability is hugely important when keeping any sort of aquarium, but your reef aquarium is going to be so much more sensitive to it than any fish aquarium that you probably kept in the past. I've noticed with my tank that minor changes that I make can have huge impacts on the tank, and it can take a long time for those changes to fully ripple through the system. A great example is when I changed my lighting over. I ran just 3 Giesman Tesla LEDs over my tank, and then I decided I'd add some T5s. I wanted to get a little better spectrum on the system and a little more par. My Stonies weren't doing as good as I'd like, so I put 4 T5 bulbs on there. So it was a huge change to the system. I bleached out a bunch of bird's nest corals. I just caused havoc to the system. First thing I did was completely wrong, and I put the light on, and I just put it on for as long as I thought it looked aesthetically pleasing. Of course, the corals weren't used to that, and I killed a bunch of coral because of it. So if you kind of look at what's happened, I did this in about August. No, I did this in November, and it's June now, and I'm finally at the point where I would say everything is fully used to the new setup. I've gone from 4 bulbs down to 2 bulbs. I've got my lighting dialed into where I like it, but it honestly took that long for my system to fully absorb that change. So now I don't want to change anything with my lighting because everything's doing so good. And it's the same thing with like water flow. I've noticed that like small changes in my pump positioning, it makes huge differences on how the tank and the corals do. And I've seen this with other reefers too. If you saw my video where my pump fell off and kind of decimated the tank, well, I had to change the way my pump was hung and its location and all that. It took 2 weeks for that little thing there to ripple its way through the system. So small things can have a dramatic effect on how the tank functions. Steve, have you noticed any of that kind of stuff with your system?
Yeah, mainly, placement of the corals and water flow, like you said. I've got the 2 Vortec MP40s, one on each side of my 125-gallon, 6-foot-long tank. And I see it with the water flow patterns when I change it, or, of course, placement of the coral is huge, as everybody knows. Nitrates get a little higher, calcium gets lower. The biggest thing I've seen is the salinity level. There was a time where I like to keep my salinity at 1.024. I'm gonna raise that a little bit. It dropped. I think I forgot to put a certain amount of salt in when I was mixing, because I make my own salt at home, as a lot of us do. It was down to 1.018, and I don't check the salinity that often. And I just thought, let me just check everything this one weekend, and it was down to 1.018, and that explained why my corals weren't doing that well. And I don't have coral like Scott. I've got frog spawn, which I love. It's my favorite. Hammer coral, star polyps, which looks like the grass that's flowing on the rock. And I've got Duncan coral. That's really all I've got. But but they were looking a little withered, a little decrepit, you know. They weren't, the Duncans weren't, hey, wide open, look at me, I'm flowing, I'm really nice. They were all like witch fingers, you know. I raised the salinity over the course of a week, and it was great. So I'd say salinity is the biggest for me. I use LED lighting, the strip on top of my tank by Orbit Marine. I absolutely love it because that's where I cut corners. I don't have the money, and I don't want to spend the money on really expensive lighting. That might sound bad, but I just don't have the money, and I don't want to spend it. I'd rather spend it on filtration. Plus, since I don't have the amount of coral that Scott does, I don't really need better lighting, if that makes sense. Like if you had just like an all fish aquarium, you know, you don't have to worry too much about the lighting. But you know, my system is more basic, I think. I know. So, but yeah, I would say it's, for me, the salinity. Speaking of that, I don't have, you know, automatic top-off units or dosing pumps or anything like that. I don't dose anything in my water. I just do a weekly water change, which is enough to bring the levels up to where they want to be. Freshens the water a bit, removes the excess waste because I vacuum the sand, and it brings the calcium levels up and everything. And once your system is stable, I don't know, what's the average time for a stable system? It depends. What would you say, like a year is pretty good?
Yeah, 6 months to a year.
6 months to a year, yeah. At that point, it's mature, and it kind of maintains itself with proper water changes. But now a good point is Scott's corals. What's the one that requires crazy amounts of calcium? What do you have?
So I got Montiporas, Acroporas. My clams use crazy calcium.
Yeah. So you've got to dose your tank with extra calcium. Right. If I need calcium, I'll just pour a quarter cup of calcium crystals in with my water mix that I make once a week. But how do you dose for extra calcium?
So you make a great point. The water chemistry needs to be as stable as you can make it. So for my system, I'm using a calcium reactor. There are several ways you can do it. You can use the 2-part balling method. That's very popular. For me, I went with a calcium reactor just because it was cool and I thought it was the most effective way to go. I'm actually going to be upgrading that soon to one that I bought. But calcium reactors are a little weird in that they do a better job at like maintaining levels, which is actually what we're looking for. So it doesn't do a very good at like adjusting it. When I first put the calcium reactor on the tank, I kind of wanted to see what it would do. So when I first put it on, it brought the alkalinity up, but the calcium stayed just the same. I had to dose calcium to level everything out. I don't know why it works that way, but that's kind of how they work. And I really like the calcium reactors because they stabilize a system like that. The one thing that I do with my calcium reactor is I kind of let it do what it wants to do as long as I'm within what are kind of like healthy calcium and alkalinity ranges. If I'm in that 425 to, let's call it 485 range, and my alkalinity is kind of like 8 to even 11. I've ran my alkalinity pretty high, but really I just want it stable. I'm less worried about hitting a number and more worried that it just kind of holds that number. Because if the system's doing well with the numbers I have, I just kind of want to leave it at that, right? If I'm getting good coral growth, everything looks good, I don't want to make changes just because I'm trying to nail a number, right? I don't want to say my alkalinity has to be 9 and my calcium has to be 450 and start changing numbers and start dosing to hit that, right? I want to go with what's actually working really well, and I also want to do what's easy, right? Because if it's easy, I'm more likely to sustain it. So there are many ways to do it, and that's the way I've chosen to do it. But really, the more stable your water quality is, the better luck you're going to have with coral. So I'm big on carbon dosing to keep the nitrates low. I have a big tank. My total water quantity is probably about 450 gallons when you look at the sump and the frag tanks and all of that. So water changes become difficult for me because a 10% water change is 45 gallons. So I've really designed my system to do a good job maintaining water quality without doing a lot in the way of water changes. The other thing is water changes also affect your stability on your system, right? Because you are putting different water chemistry in. And I'm big on just leaving it stable. I want, as long as my nitrates are low, my phosphates are low, and my mineral chemistry is where I want it, I'm not seeing a lot of reason to do water changes. So I try to let testing drive my changes.
That's a really good point. And that's something I've been thinking about more often because I do them weekly. It's not necessary. Some people do them every 2 weeks. If you've got a really great filtration system, as Scott has just stated, really good protein skimmer to export, all the bad stuff, the solids and the nitrates and all that, and the nitrates are being exported through gases out of the surface of the water. If you got good flow in the aquarium, you're vacuuming, you're doing really good cleaning. Like he said, there's no reason to do them. But that's, what that brings me, just to interject again, vacuuming those. So let's say you do a water change, say once a month, which is possible. You're probably not vacuuming your sand. A lot of people don't, but what about the waste? Well, I suppose if you got really good flow and good filtration, the waste will just blow up through the tank and be carried out.
Yeah, so the display never gets vacuumed. The way it's set up in the display, I never have algae problems. I don't need it, right? Because
you've got really good flow. Is that the main reason?
the flip. Well, it's the whole system, right? It's the cleanup crew. It's the fish. It's the 200 pounds of live rock up there. It's the fact that it's stable. It's the fact that nitrates are low. It's the fact that phosphates are low. It's everything combined working together. I mean, my live rock is covered in coralline algae, so the green hair algae doesn't have a place to establish. It's everything working together that gets me where I need to be. So the 210 gallon display has never been vacuumed. Ever. Now, you guys will see my videos where I vacuum the frag tanks, and that's a different story. And I believe the reason I keep having to vacuum those so much is because I'm using a sheet trough tank, which is basically a tank that like an animal would eat or drink from. And it's got a real rough texture to it, and I think that is like an ideal surface for algae to grow on. So I get this I get that red. I think it's cyanobacteria, but it's not the film cyano. It looks like an algae growing, but it's red. I get quite a lot of that growing, and then I get this I call it slime algae. It's like it's like this brown mat of algae that grows on the bottom. And the reason I believe I get that is because the surface on that allows that stuff to grow on it. So I vacuum that quite a bit, not as much as I should, and that's where I use that rotor tube that I've modded to be a vac. I'm able to put 30, 40 minutes into vacuuming that thing and go through basically no water.
That's awesome. I'm glad you're still using it and that it works out well for you.
Yeah, it works great.
Good. Very good. That's a great point. Because I do my weekly water change, I think I'm going to slowly start, because my tank will be a year now. So it's pretty matured. I'm going to do a water change every couple of weeks now instead of weekly. That's a good point. I didn't realize that you were not doing much maintenance as far as changes and stuff like that. That's really
right.
Good.
So
Very good.
in the other thing I can't stress enough is I use testing to tell me what to do to my tank, right? I test my nitrates, I test my phosphates, I test calcium, I test alkalinity. I don't dose anything without evidence for me to dose something, right? I will dose an alkalinity buffer if my alkalinity goes low. I will turn my calcium reactor down if my calcium or alkalinity is too high.
How often do you test?
To be honest, I've gotten pretty bad about testing my calcium and alkalinity lately, just because it's been so stable. I've been about 9 on my alkalinity lately, and closer to what was it, 475 last time I tested on my calcium. So it was a little high.
That's good. That's all
but
right.
Yeah,
you want to shoot for 400 to 450 preferably.
Right. But it's all about that stability, right? I mean, as my system's matured and everything's nailed down, I can probably test less. I've also got a pretty good eye in the tank. I notice when something's going wrong. My first thing I do when I see something going wrong in the tank is I test. I want to know what's going on. I'll test phosphates, nitrates, ammonia. I know so many people will say that there's no reason to test for ammonia. Ammonia should never be in your tank, but I test for it because if it is, something's gone majorly wrong. I've never seen it in my big display, but I'm a big fan of testing ammonia at least once in a while just to make sure that it's not in there, because it's just so deadly.
Right.
And when I see something big happen, that's really when I start worrying about ammonia.
Right. That's right. And then if you've got any trace of ammonia in your aquarium, that's a sign that something is way off, because the nitrogen cycle starts with ammonia. It gets broken down into nitrites, and those nitrates get broken down into nitrates. So if your tank's not even breaking down all of the ammonia, something's way off somewhere.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking bacteria could be dying for some reason. It's not able to break it down to get past that first stage of the cycle. So that's a good point. With that, I picked up, as you saw, I did a video on the Seachum ammonia badge. That's one of the best things ever that I bought, and I don't get paid to say that because we buy all our stuff, but it's great because it's just a little tiny wafer that's got a color wheel on it, and you suction cup it inside your aquarium. You just walk past and you see what color it is. The color dictates how much ammonia is in your tank. You always want it to be a bright yellow. Mine always is. It's great. So it's like you walk past it, you look at it, it's done. You don't have to mix it up. Big deal. It takes like 5 minutes to do an ammonia test, but it's something you don't have to do, because if it's something you have to do, you may not want to do it. It's like, I'll do it tomorrow, and tomorrow might not come. So get yourself one of those Seachum ammonia badges, because that's a great point. You should check that and not take it for granted that something's wrong. And also, a lot of you may have heard that corals are a big sign to tell you when something's wrong in your tank. And because you've got so many different types of coral, that's a really good way for you to meter your aquarium. I just have frog spawn and star polyps. I can learn from them, but not as much as what Scott can, because he's got so many different types, and they can be really good meters to tell you what's going on. If they're smaller, if they're not growing, if they're not, you could just tell if they look off, and something's wrong in the water, be it high nitrates, which is number 1, or low salt in the water, number 2. Maybe it's temperature, it's stuff, but you'll get to know this as you keep your corals.
Stability it's not just your water chemistry or your temperature or anything like that. All of that's important, but you're also going to notice it with your fish and coral, right? Because I've noticed major changes in the behavior of the fish when I've put new fish in the tank. And you'll see that when you put a new fish in the tank, it can take quite a while for everybody to adjust, right? First, that new fish has to go in there, get used to its new environment, and then everything else in the environment has to get used to it. And it's the same thing with like the corals, right? If you move them around, they never really get to adjust to their environment, right? They start getting used to one water flow, one lighting pattern, and then you move it somewhere else, then it's got to readjust. That's a stressor on it.
Right.
So assuming that you don't have like a coral in the completely wrong place, I like to just leave it alone if at all possible. I'm a big fan of just letting things be. I know so many times early on I made a lot of mistakes where if I would have just kept my hand out of the tank, it probably never would have been a problem.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
I mean, and I've noticed that with like my tangs, right? I have a purple tang and a blue tang living together. They have their own little bond, right? When I put the coal tang and the flamingian, everything changes. Everybody's doing fine together, but it takes a long time for everybody to get used to the new environment.
Yeah.
So it's kind of one of those stability issues. And when you got something like that going on, I try not to make big changes to the tank because there's already a pretty big stressor going on in that tank at that time.
Yeah, that's a good point. Not only is it like a mental stressor between the fish welcoming this newcomer, hopefully. More than likely that's the case. So know which fish go good together, of course. You have to know that. But in the end, it also does depend on the actual fish. Like, you might buy, a dog, and this breed is known to be bad with kids, but you might get one that's not bad with kids. Another thing, as Scott mentioned, with the change with the tank is you add another fish, it's going to not throw it off just mentally, emotionally, but biologically, because
Yep.
with that extra fish, you're going to feed a little bit more, and then when you're feeding a little bit more, you're going to have an extra fish that's going to the bathroom more, which is going to add to the bio load and the waste in the tank. So then your bacteria has to work a little harder, and it's a whole little process. That's why another reason newcomers to the hobby, their fish will die. They throw them all in at once. They don't want to put any time between the fish additions, and it shocks the system, and the system isn't built up enough to break that stuff down, and then fish die. So, because they get poisoned to death.
Yeah.
So that's a good point too. It's not only just the emotional on the fish, it's the bio load as well.
Yeah, and a lot of times I'll get questions. It's like, I just bought this new coral, or I just bought this new fish, and something's not right with it. And people are freaking out and they want to know what to do. A lot of times, your best answer is not to do anything. Just let it settle in, let it get used to its new environment. Don't make any big changes, right? Because I fell into that trap when I was new. Well, I put this new coral in, it wasn't doing good where I put it, so I changed the water flow. Well, everything else was fine, so I changed my water flow, and now the whole damn tank's stressed out.
Right. And you start to do so many changes, you're not sure which variable you changed that might have impacted another variable. Of course, you have to go into it knowing, it's like common sense. You do your research. Like, you don't want to have a coral right in front of a, power head, and it's getting blasted to death. Well, maybe I'll just leave it there. Maybe things will be fine. We're not talking about stuff like that. We're talking like everything's pretty good. You've got it set up nice, but things aren't thriving the way you want. Just kind of leave things be for at least a few weeks, a month maybe, and see how it goes.
And one thing I've learned is I no longer make big changes for like one coral, right? If I see one coral not doing good, I'm not going to mess with my lighting. I'm not going to mess with the water flow. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to leave that stuff stable. I might move the coral, but that's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to make, if everything else is doing good, I'm not going to make changes to the system to hopefully make one coral happy, because 99% of the time I screw up the whole system by making those changes.
Exactly.
So I try my best to avoid doing that kind of stuff. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make, and that's one thing we can hopefully learn from this video is don't make changes for one coral. It'll make your life easier.
That's exactly what I was... Hold on one second. I had him.
I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, now you can hear me.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, I was on mute accidentally. That was my brother Dave. He's here to pick up my 75-gallon aquarium. He's upgrading from the 28-gallon. He's going to keep the 28-gallon as a nice little tank. That's Dave. That's Scott in Colorado, Mile High Reefers. We're doing a live show for the channel. And we're going to go to Exotic Aquatics momentarily to take advantage of their buy one get one free sale, which I've already done because this show is going to be on a week after I go there. So I'll have videos on that of the stuff that I got. I'm not going to get crazy stuff, just a couple little things. So I don't have anything else to add. Do you want to add anything else on the stability?
No, it was just kind of a small topic, and it was just something I think people can learn from. So
it was a great topic, a very important one, and I learned a thing. You reminded me that you don't have to do water changes every week if everything's stable and everything's cool. And then I thought, well, what about vacuuming? Well, you just answered that, so I'm going to try that. If you guys... Go ahead.
And remember, it just comes down to your system setup. You have to have your system designed around it, right? I'm not saying every tank can get by without vacuuming. That's not true.
Right. And of course, one thing I wanted to add, if you have an all-in-one unit like a JBJ or a NanoCube or a Red Sea reefer, right? That's what they're called?
Yep.
An all-in-one tank where your filtration is in the back. If you don't have a protein skimmer exports the waste from your aquarium, and it collects it in a cup called a collection cup. It's filled with nasty brown gunk. That's the fish waste and crap. You unscrew it, you pour it out, you rinse it out, you put it back, and it collects more gunk. If you don't have a protein skimmer, you pretty much have to do a water change every week, because if you don't, how's that stuff going to get out of your aquarium, right? So
exactly.
I wanted to throw that in. You can't neglect water changes on a closed system like that. You've got to get that water out of there. So
absolutely.
I forgot to mention that. So that's all I've got, unless, Scott, you want to add anything else?
No, I think we're good.
Awesome. So you guys, like the channel, don't like the channel, whatever, but if you've made it this far, it means you liked it. So the statement I just made is void. Share it out to Facebook, Twitter, just get the word out. Saltwater aquariums, it's a fun hobby, although it's expensive and very time consuming. Thanks for watching. If you want to be on Reef Talk, instant message Scott through his YouTube channel, Mile High Reefers. Check out his channel and subscribe. It's great. Check out my channel, RodderTube Reef. Subscribe as well if you'd like. Make comments below on how you feel about stability. Ask us questions. And then, happy reefing. If you want to be on the show, contact us through the instant message on his channel or mine, or you can send us an email at reeftalkshow@gmail.com. All you need is a webcam and a Skype account, which is free. And you choose the topic and we'll get you on the show. All right. That's all I've got. Thanks for watching. We really do appreciate it. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks for watching.